A Dancing Fire, Chapter 1, by Wagging Yarth. Scene: the Imperial City, Cyrodiil. Date: 7. Frostfall, 3rd Era, year 397. It seemed as if the palace had always housed the Atreus Building Commission, the company of clerks and estate agents who authored and notarized every single construction of any note in the Empire. It had stood for 250 years, since the reign of the Emperor Magnus. A plain fronted an austere hall on a minor but respectable plaza in the Imperial City. Energetic and ambitious middle-class lads and ladies worked there, as well as complacent middle-aged ones like Becumus Scotty. No one could imagine a world without the Commission, least of all Scotty. To be accurate, he could not imagine a world without himself in the Commission. Lord Atreus is perfectly aware of your contributions, said the managing clerk, closing the shutter that demarcated Scotty's office behind him. But you know that things have been difficult. Yes, said Scotty, stiffly. Dorvanek's men have been giving us a lot of competition lately, and we must be more efficient if we are to survive. Unfortunately, that means releasing some of our historically best, but presently underachieving senior clerks. I understand. Can't be helped. I'm glad that you understand, smiled the managing clerk, smiling thinly and withdrawing. Please, have your room cleared immediately. Scotty began the task of organizing all of his work to pass on to his successor. It would probably be young Imbralius who would take most of it on. Which was as it should be, he considered philosophically. The lad knew how to find business. Scotty wondered idly what the fellow would do with the contracts for the new statue of Santa Alicia for which the Temple of the One had applied. Probably invent a clerical error, blame it on his old predecessor, Tempmus Scotty, and require an additional cost to rectify. I have correspondence for Decumus Scotty of the Atreus Building Commission. Scotty looked up. A fat-faced courier had entered his office and was thrusting forth a sealed scroll. He handed the boy a gold piece and opened it up. By the poor penmanship, atrocious spelling and grammar, and overall unprofessional tone, it was manifestly evident who the writer was. Leodes Shurus, a fellow clerk, some years before, who had left the commission after being accused of unethical business practices. Dear Scotty, I imagine you... Oh God. Dear Scotty, I imagine you always wonder what happened to me. And last, please, you would have expected to find me is out... Okay. Dear Scotty, I imagine you always wonder what happened to me. And the last place you would have expected to find me is out in the woods. But that's exactly where I am. Haha. If you're smart and want to make a lot of extra gold for Lord Atreus and yourself, you will come down to Valenwood too. If you haven't or have been following the politics here lately, you may or may not know that there's been a war between Bosmer and their neighbors elsewhere over the past 2 years. Things have only just calmed down, and there's a lot that needs to be rebuilt. Now, I got more business that I can handle, but I need someone with some clout, someone representing a respected agency to get the quill in the ink. That someone is you, my friend. Come and meet me at the Mther Pascos Tavern in Palinesti, Valenwood. I'll be here 2 weeks, and you won't be sorry. Churus. Yes, bring a wagon load of timber if you can. What do you have over there, Scotty? Asked a voice. Scotty started. It was Imbralius, his damnably handsome face peeking through the shutters, smiling in a way that melted the hearts of the stingiest of patrons and the roughest of stonemasons. Scotty shoved the letter in his jacket pocket. "Personal correspondence," he sniffed. "I'll be cleared up here in just a moment." "I don't want to hurry you," said Imbralis, grabbing a few sheets of blank contracts from Scotty's desk. "I have just gone through a stack, and the junior scribe's hands are all cramping up, so I thought you wouldn't miss a few." The lad vanished. Scotty retrieved the letter and read it again. He thought about his life. Something he rarely did. It seemed a sea of grey with a black, insurmountable wall looming. There was only one narrow passage he could see in that wall. Quickly, before he had a moment to reconsider it, he grabbed a dozen of the blank contracts with a shimmering gold leaf, Atreus building commission by appointment of His Imperial Majesty, and hid them in the satchel with his personal effects. The next day he began his adventure with a giddy lack of hesitation. He arranged for a seat in a caravan bound for Valenwood, the single escorted conveyance to the southeast, leaving the Imperial City that week. He had scarcely hours to pack, but he remembered to purchase a wagon load of timber. "It'll be extra gold to pay for a horse to pull that," frowned the convoy head. "So I anticipated," smiled Scotty with his best Imbralis grin. 10 wagons in all set off that afternoon through the familiar idyllic countryside, past fields of wildflowers, gently rolling woodlands, friendly hamlets. The clop of the horses' hooves against the sound-stone road reminded Scotty that the Atreus Building Commission constructed it. 5 of the 18 necessary contracts for its completion were drafted by his own hand. "Very smart of you to bring that wood along," said a grey-whiskered Breton man next to him on his wagon. "You must be in commerce." "Of a sort," said Scotty, in a way he hoped was mysterious, before introducing himself. "Lecumus Scotty." "Griff Malone," said the man. "I am a poet, actually a translator of the old Bosmer literature. I was researching some newly discovered tracks of the Menoriad Playvar 2 years ago, when the war broke out and I had to leave. You are no doubt familiar with the Menoriad if you are aware of the Green Pact." Scotty thought the man might be speaking perfect gibberish, but he nodded his head. "Naturally, I don't pretend that the Menoriad is as renowned as the Me Aleidion, or as ancient as the Den Circle, but I think it has a remarkable significance to understanding the nature of the Merolithic Bosmer mind. The origin of the wood elf aversion to cutting their own wood or eating any plant material at all. Yet paradoxically, their willingness to import plant stuff from other cultures, I feel can be linked to a passage in the Menoriad." Malone shuffled through some of his papers, searching for the appropriate text. To Scotty's vast relief, the carriage soon stopped to camp for the night. They were high on a bluff over a grey stream, and before them was the great valley of Wallenwood. Only the cry of seabirds declared the presence of the ocean to the bay of the west. Here the timber was so tall and wide, twisting around itself like an impossible knot begun aeons ago, to be impenetrable. A few more modest trees, only 50 feet to the lowest branches, stood on the cliff at the edge of the camp. The sight was so alien to Scotty, and he found himself so anxious about the proposition of entering the wilderness that he could not imagine sleeping. Fortunately, Malone had supposed he had found another academic with a passion for the riddles of Asian cultures. Long into the night, he recited Bosmer verse in the original and his own translation, sobbing and bellowing and whispering whatever appropriate. Gradually, Scotty began to feel drowsy, but a sudden crack of wood snapping made him sit straight up. "What was that?" Malone smiled. "I like it too. Convocation in the malignity of the moonless speculum, a dance of fire. There are some enormous birds up in the trees moving around," whispered Scotty, pointing in the direction of the dark shapes above. I wouldn't worry about that, said Malone, irritated with his audience. Now listen to how the poet characterizes Herman Mora's invocation in the 18th stanza of the 4th book. The dark shapes in the trees, where some of them perched like birds, others slithered like snakes, and others stood. And still others stood up straight like men. As Malone recited his verse, Scotty watched the figures softly leap from branch to branch, half gliding across impossible distances for anything without wings. They gathered in groups and then reorganized until they had spread to every tree around the camp. Suddenly, they plummeted from the heights. "Mara," cried Scotty, "they are falling like rain." "Probably seed pods," Malone shrugged, not turning around. "Some of the trees have remarkable..." The camp erupted in chaos. Fires burst out in the wagons, the horses wailed from mortar blows. Casks of wine, fresh water, and liquor gushed their contents to the ground. A nimble shadow dashed past Scotty and Malone, gathering stacks of grain and gold with impossible agility and grace. Scotty had only one glance at it, lit up a sudden nearby burst of flame. Scotty had only one glance at it, lit up by a sudden nearby burst of flame. It was a sleek creature with pointed ears, wide yellow eyes, mottled pied fur, and a tail like a whip. "Werewolf," he whispered, shrinking back. "Cathairat," groaned Malone. "Much worse. Kashiti cousins, or some such thing, come to plunder." "Are you sure?" As quickly as they struck, the creatures retreated, diving off the bluff before the battle-mentioned night. The caravan's escorts had fully opened their eyes. Malone and Scotty ran to the precipice and saw 100 feet below the tiny figures dash out of the water, shake themselves, and disappear into the woods. "Werewolves aren't acrobats like that," said Malone. "They were definitely Cathairat. Bastard thieves. Thanks tender they didn't realize the value of my notebooks. It wasn't a complete loss." A Dancing Fire, Chapter 2, by Wogan Yarth. It was a complete loss. The Cathairat had stolen or destroyed almost every item of value in the caravan in just a few minutes' time. The Cumus Scotty's wagon load of wood he had hoped to trade with Bosmer had been set on fire and then toppled off the bluff. His clothing and contracts were tattered and ground into mud of dirt mixed with split wine. All the pilgrims, merchants, and adventurers in the group moaned and wept as they gathered remnants of their belongings by the rising sun of the dawn. "I best not tell anyone that I managed to hold onto my notes for my translation of the Moon-Raid Playbar," whispered the poet Griff Malone. "They would probably turn on me." Scotty politely declined the opportunity of telling Malone just how little value he himself placed on the man's property. Instead, he counted the coins in his purse. 34 gold pieces. Very little indeed for an entrepreneur beginning a new business. "Hoi!" came a cry from the woods. A small party of Osmer emerged from the thicket, clad in leather mail and bearing arms. "Friend or foe?" "Neither," rolled the convoy head. "You must be from the Cyrodiils," laughed the leader of the group, a tall skeleton thin youth with a sharp vulpine face. "We heard you were en route. Evidently, so did our enemies." "I thought the war was over," muttered one of the caravan now ruined merchants. The Bosmer laughed again. "No act of war. Just a little border enterprise. You're going on to Falinesti?" "I'm not." The convoy head shook his head. "As far as I'm concerned, my duty is done. No more horses, no more caravan. Just a fat profit lost to me." The men and women crowded around the man, protesting, threatening, begging, but he refused to step foot in Valenwood. If these were the new times of peace, he said, he would rather come back for the next war. Scotty tried a different route and approached the Bosmer. He spoke with an authoritative but friendly voice. the kind he used in negotiations with peevish carpenters. I don't suppose you would consider escorting me to Falinesti. I am a representative for an important imperial agency, the Atrius Building Commission, here to help repair and alleviate some of the problems the war with the Kashid brought to your province. Patriotism, 20 gold pieces, and you must carry your own gear. If you have any left, replied the Bosmer. Scotty reflected that negotiations with peevish carpenters rarely went this way either. 6 eager people had enough gold on them for payment. Among these without funds was the poet, who appealed to Scotty for assistance. I'm sorry, Griff. I only have 14 gold left over. Not even enough for a decent room when I get to Falinesti. I really would help you if I could, said Scotty, persuading himself that it was true. The band of 6 and their Bosmer escorts began the descent down a rocky path along the bluff. Within an hour's time, they were deep in the jungles of Wallenwood. A never-ending canopy of hues of browns and greens obscured the sky. A millennia's worth of fallen leaves formed a deep, wormy sea of putrefaction beneath their feet. Several miles were crossed wading through the slime. For several more, they took a labyrinthian path across fallen branches and the low-hanging boughs of giant trees. All the while, hour after hour, the inexhaustible Bosmer host moved so fast, the Cyrodiils struggled to keep from being left behind. A red-faced little merchant with short legs took a bad step on a rotten branch and nearly fell. His fellow provincials had to help him up. The Bosmer paused only for a moment, their eyes continually darting to the shadows in the trees above, before moving on at their usual expeditious pace. What are they so nervous about? Wheezed the merchant irritably. More Cathayrad? Don't be ridiculous, laughed Bosmer unconvincingly. Kashid this far into Valenwood? In times of peace, they would never dare. When the group passed high enough above the swamp that the smell was somewhat dissipated, Scotty felt a sudden pang of hunger. He was used to 4 meals a day in the Cyrodiilic custom. Hours of non-stop exertion without food was not part of his regimen as a comfortably paid clerk. He pondered, feeling somewhat delirious. How long they had been trotting through the jungle? 12 hours? 20? A week? Time was meaningless. Sunlight was only sporadic through the vegetative ceiling. Phosphorescent moles on the trees and in the muck below provided the only regular illumination. Is it at all possible for us to rest and eat? He hollered to his host up ahead. We are near to Falinesti, came the echoing reply. Lots of food there. The path continued upwards for several hours more across a cloud of fallen logs, rising up to the first and then the second boughs of the tree line. As they rounded a long corner, the travelers found themselves midway up a waterfall and fell 100 feet or more. No one had the energy to complain as they began pulling up the stacks of rock, agonizing foot by foot. The Bosmer escorts disappeared into the mist, but Scotty kept climbing until there was no more rock left. He wiped the sweat and river water from his eyes. Falinesti spread across the horizon before him, sprawling across both banks of the river. Stood the mighty Grach Oak City, with groves and orchards of lesser trees crowding it like supplicants before their king. At a lesser scale, the tree that formed the moving city would have been extraordinary, gnarled and twisted with a gorgeous crown of gold and green, dripping with vines and shining with sap. At a mile tall and half as wide, it was the most magnificent thing Scotty had ever seen. If he had not been a starving man with the soul of a clerk, he would have sung. There you are, said the leader of the escorts. Not too far a walk. You should be glad it's wintertide. In summertide, the city's on the far south end of the province. Scotty was lost as to how to proceed. the side of the vertical metropolis where people moved about like ants disoriented all his sensibilities. You wouldn't know of an inn called... He paused for a moment and then pulled Judas' letter from his pocket. Something like Mother Pasca's Tavern? Mother Pasca's. The lead bossman laughed his familiar, contemptuous laugh. You won't want to stay there? Visitors always prefer the Aisha Hall in the top bows. It's expensive, but very nice. I'm meeting someone at Mother Pasca's Tavern. If you have made your mind to go, take a lift to Havel's Slump and ask for directions there. Just don't get lost and fall asleep in the Western Cross. This apparently struck the youth's friends a very witty jest, and so it was with the laughter echoing behind him that Scotty crossed the wreathing root system to the base of Alinesti. The ground was littered with leaves and refuse, and from moment to moment, a glass or a bone would plummet from afar above. So he walked with his neck crooked to have warning. An intricate network of platforms anchored to thick vines slipped up and down the sleek trunk of the city with perfect grace, manned by operators with arms as thick as an ox's belly. Scotty approaches the nearest fellow at one of the platforms, who was idly smoking from a glass pipe. I was wondering if you might take me to Havel Slump. The man nodded, and within a few minutes' time, Scotty was 200 feet in the air, at a crook between two mighty branches. Curled webs of moss stretched unevenly across the fork, forming a sharing roof for several dozen small buildings. There were only a few souls in the alley, but around the bend ahead, he could hear the sound of music and people. Scotty tipped the Falinesti platform ferryman a gold piece and asked for the location of Mother Pasca's Tavern. Straight ahead of you, sir, but you won't find anyone there, the ferryman explained, pointing in the direction of the noise. Mourn does everyone in Havelslum has reveille. Scotty walked carefully along the narrow street, though the ground felt as solid as the marble avenues of the Imperial City. There were thick cracks in the bark that exposed fatal drops into the river. He took a moment to sit down, to rest, and get used to the view from the heights. It was a beautiful day for certain, but it took Scotty only a few minutes of contemplation to rise up in alarm. A showy little raft anchored downstream below him had distinctly moved several inches while he watched it. But he hadn't moved at all. He had. Together with everything around him. It was no metaphor. The city of Falinesti walked, and considering its size, it moved quickly. Scotty rose to his feet and into a cloud of smoke that drifted out from around the bend. It was the most delicious roast he had ever smelled. The clerk forgot his fear and ran. The revelry, as the ferryman had termed it, took place on an enormous platform tied to the tree, wide enough to be a plaza in any other city. A fantastic assortment of the most amazing people Scotty had ever seen were jammed shoulder to shoulder together, many eating, many more drinking, and some dancing to a lutist and singer perched on an off-shot above the crowd. They were largely Bosmer, true natives clad in colorful leather and bones, with a close minority of orcs. Whirling through the throng, dancing and bellowing at one another were a hideous ape people. A few heads bobbing over the tops of the crowd belonged not, as Scotty first assumed, to very tall people, but to a family of centaurs. Care for some mutton? Inquired a wizened old mare who roasted an enormous beast on some red-hot rods. Scotty quickly paid him a gold piece and devoured the leg he was given, and then another gold piece and another leg. The fellow chuckled when Scotty began choking on a piece of gristle, and handed him a mug of a frothing white drink. He drank it and felt a quiver run through his body, as if he were being tickled. "What is that?" Scotty asked. "Jaga, fermented pig's milk. I can let you have a flagon of it and a bit more mutton for another gold. Scotty agreed, paid, gobbled down the meat, and took the flagon with him as he slipped into the crowd. His co-worker, Leodas Shurus, the man who had told him to come to Ballinwood, was nowhere to be seen. When the flagon was a quarter empty, Scotty stopped looking for Shurus. When it was half empty, he was dancing with the group, oblivious to the broken planks and gaps in the paintwork. At 3/4 empty, he was trading jokes with a group of centaurs whose language was completely alien to him. By the time the flagon was completely drained, he was asleep, snoring, while the revelry continued on all around his supine body. The next morning, still asleep, Scotty had the sensation of someone kissing him. He made a face to return the favor, but a pain like fire spread through his chest and forced him to open his eyes. There was an insect the size of a large calf sitting on him, crushing him, its spiky legs holding him down, while a central spiral-bladed vortex of a mouse tore through his shirt. He screamed and thrashed, but the beast was too strong. It had found its meal, and it was going to finish it. It's over, thought Scotty widely. I should have never left home. I could have stayed in the city and perhaps found work with Lord Bannock, and I could have begun again as a junior clerk and worked my way back up. Suddenly, the mouth released itself. The creature shivered once, expelled a burst of yellow bile, and died. Got one, cried a voice, not too distantly. For a moment Scotty lay still. His head throbbed and his chest burned. Out of the corner of his eyes, he saw movement. Another of the horrible monsters hurried towards him. He scrambled, trying to push himself free, but before he could come out, there was a sound of a bow cracking, and an arrow pierced the second insect. Good shot, cried another voice. Get the first one again. I just saw it move a little. This time Scotty felt the impact of the bolt hit the carcass. He cried out, but he could hear how muffled his voice was by the beetle's body. Cautiously, he tried sliding a foot out and rolling under, but the movement apparently had the effect of convincing the archers that the creature still lived. A volley of arrows was launched forth. Now the beast was sufficiently perforated so pools of its blood, and likely the blood of its victims, began to seep out onto Scotty's body. When Scotty was a lad, before he grew too sophisticated for such sports, he had often gone to the Imperial Arena for the competitions of war. He recalled a great veteran of the fights. When asked, telling him his secret, "Whenever I'm in doubt of what to do, and I have a shield, I stay behind it." Scotty followed that advice. After an hour, when no longer heard arrows being fired, he threw aside the remains of the bug and leapt as quickly as he could to a stand. It was not a moment too soon. A gang of 8 archers had their bows pointing his direction, ready to fire. When they saw him, they laughed. "Didn't anyone ever tell you not to sleep in the Western Cross? How are we going to exterminate all the Hoarders if you drunks keep feeding them?" Scotty shook his head and walked back along the platform, round the bend to Havel Slump. He was bloodied and torn and tired, and he had far too much fermented pig's milk. All he wanted was a proper place to lie down. He stepped into the Mother's Pascot's tavern, a dank place, wet with sap, smelling of milled dew. My name is Decumus Scotty," he said. "I was hoping you have someone named Judas staying here." "Decumus Scotty?" pondered the fleshy proprieties. "Mother Pascot's herself." "I've heard that name. Oh, you must be the fellow he left the note for. Let me go see if I can find it." A Dancing Fire, Chapter 3, by Joachim Jarth. Mother Pascost disappeared into the sordid hole that was her tavern, and emerged a moment later with a scrap of paper with Leodas Jure's familiar scroll. Decumus Scotty held it up before a patch of sunlight that had found its way through the massive boughs of the tree city and read, "Scotty, So you made it to Falinesti, Ballyware. Congratulations. I am sure you had quite an adventure getting here. Unfortunately, I'm not here anymore, as you probably could guess. There's a town downriver called Athie I'm at. Get a boat and join me. Get a boat and join me. It's ideal. I hope you brought a lot of contracts, because these people need a lot of building done. They were close to the war, you see, but not so close they don't have any money left to pay. Haha, meet me down here as soon as you can. Cheers. So, Scotty pondered. Shurus had left Falinesti and gone to some place called Athie. Given his poor penmanship and ghastly spelling, it could equally be Athi, Athi, Othri, Imthri, Urtha, or Krakamaka. The sensible thing to do, Scotty knew, was to call this adventure over and try to find some way to get back home to the Imperial City. He was no mercenary devoted to a life of thrills. He was, or at least had been, a senior clerk at a successful private building commission. Over the last few weeks, he had been robbed by the Cathay Rat, taken on a death march through the jungle by a gang of giggling Bosmerry, half starved to death, drugged with fermented pig's milk, nearly slain by some kind of giant tick, and attacked by archers. He was filthy, exhausted, and had, he counted, 10 gold pieces to his name. Now the man whose proposal brought him to the depths of misery was not even there. It was both judicious and seemingly to abandon the enterprise entirely. And yet, a small but distinct voice in his head told him, "You have been chosen. You have no other choice but to see this through." Scotty turned to the stout old woman, Mother Pascost, who had been watching him curiously. "I was wondering if you knew of a village that was at the edge of the recent conflict with Elsewhere. It's called something like Athie?" "You must mean Athey," she grinned. "My middle lad, Big Lil, he manages a dairy down there. Beautiful country, right on the river. Is that where your friend went?" "Yes," said Scotty. "Do you know the fastest way to get there?" After a short conversation and an even shorter ride to Falinesti's route by way of the platforms and a shock to the riverbank, Scotty was negotiating transport with a huge, fair-haired Bosmer with a face like a pickled carp. He called himself Captain Baldfix, but even Scotty, with his sheltered life, could recognize him for what he was: a retired pirate for hire, a smuggler for certain, and probably much worse. His ship, which had clearly been stolen in the distant past, was a bent old Imperial sloop. 50 gold and we will be in Athey in 2 days' time," boomed the Captain Baldfix expansively. "I have 10. No, sorry, 9 gold pieces," replied Scotty, feeling the need for explanation added. "I have 10, but I gave 1 to the platform ferryman to get me down here." 9 is just as fine," said the captain agreeably. "Truth be told, I was going to Athey whether you paid me or not. Make yourself comfortable on the boat. We'll be leaving in just a few minutes." Douglas Scotty boarded the vessel, which sat low in the water of the river, stacked high with crates and sacks that spilled out of the hold and galley and onto the deck. Each was marked with stamps advertising the most innocuous substances: copper, scraps, lard, ink, high rock meal, marked for cattle, tar, fish shelly. Scotty's imagination reeled, picturing what sorts of illicit imports were truly aboard. It took more than those few minutes for Captain Balfix to haul in the rest of his cargo, but in an hour the anchor was up and they were sailing downriver towards Athey. The green-grey water barely rippled, only touched by the fingers of the breeze. Lush plant life crowded the banks, obscuring from sight all the animals that sang and roared at one another. Lulled by the serene surroundings, Scotty drifted to sleep. At night, he woke and gratefully accepted some clean clothes and food from Captain Balfix. Why are you going to Athey, may I ask?" queried the Bosmer. I'm meeting a former colleague there. He asked me to come down from the Imperial City where I worked for the Atreus Building Commission to negotiate some contracts. Scotty took another bite of the dried sausages they were sharing for dinner. We're going to try to repair and refurbish whatever bridges, roads, and other structures that got damaged in the recent war with the Kashiti. It's been a hard 2 years, said the captain. The captain nodded his head. Though I suppose good for me and the likes of you and your friend. Trade routes cut off. Now they think there's going to be war with the Somerset Isles. You heard that? Scotty shook his head. I've done my share of smuggling skooma down the coast, even helping some revolutionary types escape the Maine's wrath. But now the wars have made me a legitimate trader, a businessman. The first casualties of war is always the corrupted. Scotty said he was sorry to hear that, and they lapsed into silence, watching the stars and moon's reflection on the still water. The next day, Scotty awoke to find the captain wrapped up in his sail, torpid from alcohol, singing in a low, slurred voice. When he saw Scotty rise, he offered his flagon of Jaga. I learned my lesson during revelry at Western Cross. The captain laughed and then burst into tears. I don't want to be legitimate. Other pirates I used to know are still raping and stealing and smuggling and selling nice folk like you into slavery. I swear to you, I never thought the first time that I ran a real shipment of legal goods that my life would turn out like this. Oh, I know, I would go back to it, but Bandar knows not. After all I have seen, I am a ruined man. Scotty helped the weeping mare out of the sail, murmuring words of reassurance. Then he added, Forgive me for changing the subject, but where are we? Oh, moaned Captain Balfix miserably. We made good time. Athay's right around the bend in the river. Then it looks like Athay's on fire, said Scotty, pointing. A great plume of smoke, black as pitch, was rising above the trees. As they drifted around the bend, they next saw the flames, and then the blackened skeletal remains of the village. Dying, blazing villagers leapt from the rocks into the river. A cacophony of wailing met their ears, and they could see, roaming along the edge of the town, the figures of Kashiti soldiers bearing torches. Bandar bless me, slurred the captain, the war's back on. Oh no, whispered Scotty. The sloop drifted with the current towards the opposite shore away from the fiery town. Scotty turned his attention there, and the sanctuary it offered. Just a peaceful arbor away from the horror. There was a shudder of leaves in 2 of the trees, and a dozen live Kashiti dropped to the ground, armed with bows. They see us, hissed Scotty, and they have got bows. Of course they have bows, snarled Captain Balfix. We Mossberg may have invented the bloody things, but we didn't think to keep them secret, you bloody bureaucrat. Now they are setting their arrows on fire. Yes, they do that sometimes. Captain, they are shooting at us. They are shooting at us with flaming arrows. Ah, so they are, the captain agreed. The aim here is to avoid being hit, but hit they were, and very shortly thereafter. Even worse, the second volley of arrows hit the supply of pitch. The supply of pitch, which ignited in a tremendous blue blaze. Scotty grabbed Captain Balfix and they leapt overboard, just before the ship and all its cargo disintegrated. The shock of the cold water brought the Bosmer into temporary sobriety. He called to Scotty, who was already swimming as fast as he could towards the bend. Master Decumus, where do you think you're swimming to? Back to Falinesti, cried Scotty. It will take you days, and by the time you get there, everyone will know about the attack on Athe. They will never let anyone they don't know in. The closest village downriver is Granos. Maybe they will give us shelter. Scotty swam back to the captain, and side by side they began paddling in the middle of the river, past the burning residuum of the village. He thanked Mara that he had learned to swim. Many a Cyrodiil did not, as largely landlocked as the imperial province was, Had he been raised in Mir Korub or Artemon, he might have been doomed, but the imperial city itself was encircled by water, and every lad and lass there knew how to cross without a boat, even those who grew up to be clerks and not adventurers. Captain Balfic's sobriety faded as he grew used to the water's temperature. Even in wintertide, the Silo River was fairly temperate, and after a fashion, even comfortable. The Bosmer's strokes were uneven, and he would stray closer to Scotty and then further away, pushing ahead and then falling behind. Scotty looked to the shore to his right. The flames had caught the trees like tinder. Behind them was an inferno, with which they were barely keeping pace. To the shore on their left all looked fair, until he saw a tremble in the river reeds, and then what caused it. A pride of the largest cats he had ever seen. They were auburn-haired, green-eyed beasts with jaws and teeth to match his wildest nightmares, and they were watching the two swimmers, and keeping pace. Captain Balfix, we can't go to either that shore or the other one, or we will be parboiled or eaten, Scotty whispered. Try to even your kicking and your strokes. Breathe like you would normally. If you're feeling tired, tell me and we will float on our backs for a while. Anyone who had had the experience of giving rational advice to a drunkard would understand the hopelessness. Scotty kept pace with the captain, slowing himself, quickening, drifting, left and right, while the Bosmer moaned all ditties from his pirate days. When he wasn't watching his companion, he watched the cats on the shore. After a stretch, he turned to his right. Another village had caught fire. Undoubtedly, it was Granos. Scotty stared at the blazing fury, awed by the sight of the destruction, and did not hear that the captain had ceased to sing. When he turned back, Captain Balfix was gone. Scotty dove into the murky depths of the river over and over again. There was nothing to be done. When he surfaced after his final search, he saw that the giant cats had moved on, perhaps assuming that he too had drowned. He continued his lonely swim downriver. A tributary, he noted, had formed a final barrier, keeping the flames from spreading further. But there were no more towns. After several hours, he began to ponder the wisdom of going ashore. Which shore was the question. He was spared the decision. Ahead of him was a rocky island with a bonfire. He did not know if he were intruding on a party of Osmeri or Kashidi, only that he could swim no more. With straining, aching muscles, he pulled himself into the rocks. They were Bosmer refugees, he gathered. Even before they told him, roasting over the fire was the remains of one of the giant cats that had been stalking him throughout the jungle on the opposite shore. Senche tiger, said one of the young warriors ravenously, is no animal. It is as smart as any Cathay rat, or Oms, or any other bleeding Kashidi. Pity this one drowned. I would have gladly killed it. You will like the meat, though. Sweet from all the sugar these asses eat. Scotty did not know he was capable of eating a creature as intelligent as a man or mare, but he surprised himself, as he had done several times over the last days. It was rich, succulent, and sweet, like sugared pork, but no seasonings had been added. He surveyed the crowd as he ate, a sad lot, some still weeping for lost family members. They were the survivors of both the villages of Grenos and Athay, and war was on every person's lips. Why had the Kashidi attacked again? Why specifically directed at Scotty? As a zero deal. Why was the Emperor not enforcing peace in his provinces? I was to meet another zero deal, he said to a Bosmer maiden who he understood to be from Athay. His name was Leo Destrurus. I don't suppose you know what might have happened to him. I don't know your friend, but there were many zero deals in Athay when the fire came, said the girl. Some of them, I think, left quickly. They were going to Vindisi, inland, in the jungle. I am going there tomorrow, so are many of us. If you wish, You may come as well. The cummus Scotty nodded solemnly. He made himself as comfortable as he could in the stony ground of the river island, and somehow, after much effort, he fell asleep. But he did not sleep well.